So I'm delighted to be here with Dave Cole today, Chief Innovation Officer of the state of New Jersey, and I want to congratulate you on this fantastic new grant. And maybe you could just tell us very briefly, what is this winning proposal? What has the Office of Innovation in the state of New Jersey won? What's the
Thanks,
problem that
Beth.
you're solving?
Yeah, I appreciate it. And of course, as folks will likely know, you are our first Chief Innovation Officer of the state of New Jersey. And so a lot of what we've been able to do is build on some of the work that you put in motion and that you and I got to work on together and continue in your role supporting the state. We have had for a number of years AI related projects that are focused on improving the way the government operates and delivers services. Often those projects are one off projects with individual agencies. With the Public Benefit Innovation Funds grant, we are able to take some of those projects now and build them into a more generally available platform so that across state government we have access to the same tools that we've been using on individual projects and also have the resources to make that available for the broader civic technology community so that as the federal government is shifting more of the responsibility of running these critical programs onto the states, we all collectively across the states can work together and try to solve the problems.
Maybe you could unpack for us a little bit in plain English what the components of the project are. It has fancy words in the proposal like entity resolution, which may not be easily accessible to everybody reading it. Could you just tell us in kind of your own words, what are the problems that this is designed to solve and what are the different tools in the toolkit?
We looked across a number of places in the processing of government benefits, particularly those related to access to healthcare, to other human services, where things get slow. One of the first things is often you have to upload a document. And then what happens with that document? Well, depending on the program, it can range from it gets printed out and put in a physical file folder somewhere that someone picks up and then reads and types into a database or honestly a mainframe sometimes. Or it can be a scanned image that somebody does the same. They have multiple windows open and they're copying information. One of the most clear use cases that we've seen working with our Economic Development Authority is taking documents that are uploaded and actually processing them with an LLM using the computer vision capability to extract information. These documents might not be structured or we might not know what the format's going to look like. So the LLMs are actually really good at pulling out the information into structured data like a spreadsheet. That also allows us to test to make sure that the information seems accurate. Are the dates current? Does the things that we need to see on that form, are they present? And then provide the person applying with the feedback about whether that's likely to be an accurate document. They can choose to submit it, or maybe if they uploaded the wrong document, can make a change. So just speaking about the entity resolver as an example, that project, when we worked on it in a pilot, saved about 20 days in processing the applications for EDA because usually they'd go to a manual review process and there's a backlog and it's hard to get to. If we pull all those document validation questions out using the AI, imagine how that applies to SNAP or Medicaid or labor programs or any other program across the state. It's a similar problem. So we found 6 different use cases and we're trying to figure out how can we make them available to solve those problems across the board because we think that while the programs are very different, the kinds of things that slow down processing can be the same.
So, in other words, for a citizen, they don't have to learn any new technology. They don't have to do something in a digital way if they don't feel comfortable. They can still apply on paper. And then from the back end, you're using AI to make it faster to read and process the information that they've given you and ensure that it's accurate. What are the other components of this? So you mentioned 6. This sounds like one that you're calling the entity resolver or entity resolution. What are the other 5 pieces of the project?
Yeah, another common problem is synthesizing feedback. So we get a lot of information on public websites or in public comment. So we have a tool that takes public information and synthesizes it into topics, trends, sentiment, and provides actionable reports for folks to use. Um, we have a different version of, so the document, the entity kind of resolver I talked about is actually 2 parts. One is extracting the data so that it can be processed. The other part is then validating and providing real-time feedback. For folks who are applying online, if you can let them know that there's an error, they can fix the error and self-cure before having to have a delay. Um, we have also helped a lot of agencies with memo generation. So a lot of times to move things in government, as you well know, you have to write a memo. The memos require a lot of source inputs. They can take a week or so to write. And so we have a tool that helps take source information and templates and generate repeatable memos that go through templates. And that alone can take a process that takes a week and compress it down to a couple minutes. I should say with all of these, there's always a human review, which I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about. But the point of these tools is to help reduce the repetitive work that could be automated, not the decision making. The review, the editing, the final sort of sign off, and the decision making always rests with humans as well. Um, I think one other one just worth highlighting is something that our AI for Impact Fellows last year had put together too, where it's probably no surprise that often government websites can use a lot of help in improving the accessibility of the content, the language of the content. And so there's a tool that does a content analysis on public government websites and produces a series of recommendations for how to simplify the language, make sure that it's more user friendly, mobile accessible, and such. And so those reports can then influence how we actually communicate about programs and hopefully help people access the benefits to which they're entitled.
I think, it's really exciting because these are innovations that can be acted upon right now. And you've actually been doing this work in pilots with a variety of agencies. Maybe before we come back to the point about human judgment, which you just referenced, I would just love to hear a little bit more about some of the pilots, maybe, how you use these kinds of features in the past. Like, what's one or two things you were able to accomplish doing these sorts of very practical and tactical things with simple AI tools?
The one that always stands out the most to me, just feels really very viscerally effective, is a couple of years ago, the state participated in the summer school meals, the summer EBT program, for the first time. This was a chance for us as a state to offer cash assistance to families that are eligible for free and reduced meals during the school year, but also families who are eligible because they're enrolled in other programs such as SNAP and Medicaid, TANF, enrolled in the foster care system and such. The challenge, though, is that there's no common link between all of the enrollment files of those different programs. Some of them are filed by parent or some by student. People move, so addresses might not match, and social security numbers aren't a good, reliable ID, and they're not available in many of the files either. So we built a tool, actually, and this is what is proposed to extend in the pilot as one of the projects too, that takes those data sets and it applies a series of matching tests, starting with, do the records match? All the fields are the same. And then gets into probabilistic matching using a machine learning algorithm to give us a confidence score of the likelihood of a match. But the net benefit of doing that kind of work, we could take all these disparate data sets and at the end produce a file of about 100,000 families that are eligible to get the benefit that would not have received the benefit had we not gone through this work in partnership with the Department of Agriculture here, simply because they were just lost in one of the files and we couldn't link them in. And so we've done that now for 2 years, each year over 100,000 new benefits being issued because of that. So you can see the real impact that that can have. And again, that matching problem is not unique to the agriculture and the SCBT domain, right? You could imagine many different cases across government where something like that would be a really useful tool.
So maybe let's come back now. That's, I agree with you viscerally. It just really helps to make clear how real people benefit from these kinds of changes. Obviously, when you come up with this file or this list of people who are potentially entitled to a benefit and not getting it, what's the process then, the handoff between the technology and the human judgment? Because obviously, a human needs to look at this in the end and decide, yes, a benefit needs to go out here. Or in some of the other examples that you've given us, you've talked about the tools not doing the deciding, the people still do the deciding. So how do you kind of design that process, that handoff between the tech and the human element?
Yeah, in that case, there are a couple human inputs. The first is to set the threshold that you want to see matches. So if you say we want to see matches that the system believes has an 80 or 90% confidence rate, you set that threshold. And then those files go back to the experts who are in Department of Agriculture who review the files anyway. Even when it's a manual match, they go through, they check to make sure that they can cite the individual in one of the relevant enrollment files and that there's nothing that comes up. When we have a program like the SCBT program, we're using a different form of artificial intelligence under something more aligned with machine learning, probabilistic matching. So it's a lot more of a stable technology. We wouldn't necessarily use generative AI for that. Generative AI is very useful for other things. And that's where you might see hallucinations come in. So we try to pick the right technology for the job, depending on the decision making that will go into that program. But in the use case of generative artificial intelligence, I mentioned memos. We have to, as a government, write memos to authorize access to certain programs if there's a special needs or some sort of review that needs to take place. There's usually a template that's followed from that. And so what we can do is automate finding the relevant information in source documents to put together a memo in draft form that then the adjuster who's going to review that claim or that application will review. And they still go back. They have both up. They have the source documents and they have the actual draft memo. And they make sure that everything aligns up and they can cross-reference in the memo the things that they have in the source documents. Um, and that at the end they edit and they sign off of it. The standard that we have is that the work that we submit, whether it's using AI or not, is still work that individually as state employees, folks take ownership over. So the technology helps speed up that process, but the review process is still there. And in many ways, the review process might just be simpler because somebody didn't have to spend days working on a memo to the point where, as we've all seen, your eyes kind of glaze over because you've seen the same content so many times. They're really focused on being critical and having a fact-checking lens on it, which is a different mindset to apply. So we take the human verification very seriously. It's still a part of the process, but we can speed up all the steps before that.
So I think what's very exciting here is that, I mean, this Public Benefit Innovation Fund has given the grant for the Office of Innovation to create these tools to then use, as you said, with a wide variety of agencies across many, many examples in government. As you talk to an agency leader, the CIO, the commissioner, the secretary, what conditions need to be in place for them to be able to take advantage of these process improvements and of these tools? What kind of an agency, sort of who would you work with, who would you not work with to then deploy these kinds of simplification tools?
Yeah, I think it's worth just taking a quick step back to talk about how we got to this point in New Jersey. One of the first things that we've done is you were instrumental in setting up and Innovate US now as a broader network makes available. We put together a training program for public professionals who are working with artificial intelligence. So the first thing we would want is that the folks who are going to use the technology go through the training. That's going to help them understand what what the technology is good at, what it's not yet good at, common use cases, how to use it for productivity, and what to look out for and make sure that there's sensible guardrails in place. The state then has a policy document, our acceptable use policy, which is also freely available if other states want to take a look at, where we go through and try to be very practical about when using artificial intelligence is in a sort of safe domain that we've reviewed on platforms that are secure and that are within our IT infrastructure, and you could just start using them, or where you might be getting into use cases where we need to have an additional review and what that review process looks like to make sure that there's good sort of sign off on the use cases. So we try to take an approach where we're not prohibiting it because very often in IT and other things, if you tell people no, you can't do it, they'll just find another way to do it that might even be less secure. So we want to just have them have the tools and the training to be able to responsibly deploy the technology and then support them in the ways that they might go about it. So enter then the platform. One of the first things that we built alongside that training was our general sort of chatbot, like a ChatGPT or Copilot that we called the New Jersey AI Assistant. And it's built in the state infrastructure, backed by commercially available models. And so that's something that about 20% of the state workforce has used actively. It's got a very good adoption. If alongside of that, we can start to launch new tools, such as now you can upload spreadsheets of data and get probabilistic matches. Or now you can connect into an API. So when you upload a document through your application, you get real-time feedback, extracting the data from that document into structured information. We see extending that platform because it already has the adoption. It's already linked and tied in with the training program into a set of tools. And then I think there'll be, we have to set all this up, but probably a lot of workshops and sessions where we can really get hands-on and hear people's use cases about what they're trying to do with the technology. I think the last thing I'd say on this, which is just core to our approach as a team, is we want to start with the actual problems people have. We want to be very human-centered in our approach. We're not leading with, we have the solution and we need to figure out the problem. We're leading with, where are people getting stuck getting access to their benefits? Because we know the cost of delays, both economic and personal. So then we'll try to figure out which tools, whether it's artificial intelligence or something else, can then simplify that process and hopefully get things moving faster.
So, do you ever worry that having these kinds of tools for making things easier and better, or maybe let me put it in the positive way, do you feel confident that this can get us most of the way towards the kind of government simplification, modernization, and improvements that we need? Or are there places where having the tools are forestalling or would forestall changes that we need, let's say, in policy? In other words, we need to change the form that people fill out altogether rather than just make the form easier to read. That we need to change the rules on how we do something rather than just make it faster and simpler to process that. Like, how do you think about the balance between these two things? Where does it tip from we can simplify this using tools into we need to branch out in our toolkit to really just change how we do things and to legislate or regulate or otherwise sort of change the process?
I think we absolutely need to do both. It can be a very frustrating experience to try to design a form that covers up a lot of complexity and conflicting eligibility requirements, or just things that once you look at in totality don't really make sense. Sometimes in our work, we have to do that because the policies move at a much slower pace, right? You might advocate, but if the legislative priorities aren't aligned, then you don't get those changes. It's that time in between advocating and getting the legislative and policy results that I personally worry most about, because I think about the folks who are applying for these benefits. And it's very hard for anybody to think about the excuse for why their benefits are delayed being because the policy isn't written right. I mean, certainly go call your representatives and lobby for better policy and more sensible service delivery. But at the end of the day, if we can deploy technology to make that process easier and get people back on their feet, that's where I think we want to lean into it. So we identify and try to raise and work through, the structures that we have in New Jersey to advocate for better policy change. But at the same time, we have to keep moving and delivering for folks.
So let me ask you another question about something that has not been typically practiced or processed or not been a lot of demand for in government because it's been so hard to do is that feedback element that you talked about before. One of these six tools is, and you've had a lot of experience now using technology to make feedback easier. So to make it easier to ask citizens, how do we make this service better? Apropos of understanding the problem. What's going to be the process once, the tools are sort of more robust? For convincing leaders who haven't otherwise wanted to open the floodgates of public opinion or take on feedback because it's just so much work to process. How do you convince people? Is having the tool enough, or how do you go about sort of convincing people in agencies to say, hey, let's get citizen feedback on the services that we're delivering?
I think having the tool helps, but we start through a process that has a lot of just research in the beginning. One of the first things we'll do in a program is take a look at Reddit. It is very clear what people think about some of the state programs when you go on Reddit. And some of them are funny and some of them are really tough to read. And we'll print those things out or forward them along and bring them to meetings and say, this is what people are experiencing right now. And we know this in the anecdotes of the folks who know which channels to go to be able to make their case heard. Um, we want to see that in aggregate as well. And so we'll do more traditional things like surveys after you fill out an application, try to get some baseline and measure over time changes in user sentiment. Um, but there's really nothing like the feedback that you get when you have a form up and just let people unstructured tell you what their problem is. Or sometimes, as you make improvements too, you get to see the things that work and people will say, like, I did this last year and this form was missing. Now it's there. And I really appreciate that improvement. So there's also a positive loop that starts to occur when you get better feedback and you can bring that to the team and say, look, what we're doing is working and we need to double down in this. But I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes the reason folks are hesitant in government to ask for feedback is they don't feel like they have the capacity to understand it. They don't want to open the door if they can't let everybody in. So I think tools like this can help with that. It doesn't replace reading through all the feedback and really getting the human sentiment. But one thing that we try to do is when we have a model produce a summary, we ask the model to illustrate every single point, every single trend it's highlighting with direct quotes from the corpus of feedback so that we can then use those as breadcrumbs and go back and check and make sure that they're accurate, but also get that real flavor of what people are actually saying.
Very cool. So since we agreed to do this interview, there's been a very exciting development, which is the institutionalization of the work of the Office of Innovation now as the New Jersey Innovation Authority. Maybe you could just quickly tell us, what does that shift mean for the work that you're doing, and how does it change this ability to use AI to modernize government services?
I think it gives us a very stable foundation in New Jersey. And again, as you know better than anybody else in this state and in this work, we got started at the beginning of Governor Murphy's administration with the appointment of a chief innovation officer. Um, and a relatively small budget to be able to start doing some of that work. It has grown through continuous investment over time. We've been able to build this team now of world-class talent that we're very grateful to have focused on the work of residents and businesses in New Jersey. Um, but a lot of the structure grew up ad hoc as we evolved it over time. Now we have in legislation that there is an authority. It is the source of technology modernization and innovation in the state, across the state government. It is charged with working with all of the agencies across the state government to help them in improving their service delivery. It has all the things that we prioritize in its mandate around being human-centered, being data-driven, being iterative in our development. And so for us, I think having that in a permanent law means that this work can continue. It doesn't depend on any one of us individually telling the stories and describing the methodology. It can be hopefully a strong permanent part of improving the way government's delivered over time. There's certainly a lot of details to figure out as we're setting up, a new entity, and there will be things that come along with doing that. But I think it puts, particularly as we head into a transition to a new administration, some infrastructure in place that I also hope will allow the new team coming in to run very fast and hit a lot of the priorities that they have, which also touch on improving customer experience, speeding up the time it takes to, or decreasing the time it takes to start a business, and making sure that folks are getting just a very high quality response from their government.
I can't help but ask a question we've often heard from critics. If we're trying to reduce bureaucracy, if we're trying to simplify government, how do you fix government with more government? So why create a new institution in an effort to actually make government simpler?
Yeah, it's something I have heard before. I had the opportunity to testify a bit in support of our effort to codify, and some folks in the legislature asked that question. Um, I believe the track record is very clear that where we have invested our team and our time, we have saved money and delivered better outcomes. And decreasing the time it takes to get a benefit program means often, especially with the labor program, people getting money in their pockets sooner, getting back into the economy, back into the workforce. So, there are economic values to doing this work too. Um, One very clear example, so we have business.nj.gov, which is a central permitting and licensing platform for the state. And we had an analysis done last year in partnership with the Department of Labor, which showed that over the course of 2024, over $160 million of economic activity were generated by businesses who started their business through business.nj.gov and got started weeks earlier than they would have through other means. So that weeks earlier means people are hiring staff sooner, they're generating wages sooner, and then money's getting back into the economy. So sometimes it takes a little bit of investment if you want to see outsized gains. And I think investing in technology, investing in a central team in a central capacity is that jolt that the state and government generally needs at a time where we're trying to deliver better services and rebuild trust with the public.
So, as we wrap up here, maybe let me just ask you, as you reflect back on your tenure as Chief Innovation Officer, as you look ahead to this new work in the New Jersey Innovation Authority, what's the one most important thing that you hope the authority will carry forward from the Office of Innovation, and that you would also impart to others as they think about their work in governance innovation?
Being very connected to the folks that we serve. I started with the summary BT example because, as someone who grew up in New Jersey, I know people who benefit from a program like that. I know people who are on Medicaid, but it's not just even about my own sort of personal experience. It's that there's a huge diversity of experiences in the state, and we have to be very connected in that so that we don't think about New Jersey or state government or any government through the lens of our own experiences, and that we have everybody's best interests at heart. I have always been humbled by the work that our team does in having research sessions, not only at the beginning, but throughout the project, so that the folks that we're building and designing these services with feel connected to them, feel like they have a stake and can provide that feedback. And in any organization, as you grow and things expand, you can lose some of those core values that you started with. That's one that I truly hope that we hold on to. And I think it's pointed out very simple solutions sometimes to complex problems just because we talk to the people who have that lived experience. So that would be the thing I hope, withstands all of our work on this.
I think it's very exciting. And the fact that the office is starting, this new authority is starting, as the office has been not just a team of engineers and technologists, although, as you say, there are first rate tech people, is people who can do research, people who can do that outreach, people who are thinking about the latest advances in the social sciences, not just the latest advances in AI and computer sciences, so that we have that multidisciplinary capacity to bring to bear to really think about how to solve problems in the world. So I think that that is going to be really exciting, is that just the talent that you've been able to marshal and assemble to work on these really hard problems that affect people's lives. And I'm excited that this work has been recognized by the Public Innovation Fund grant. And by now, the legacy of the office being carried forward across administrations into this new innovation authority. So, congratulations. Congratulations to
Thank
the
you.
whole team on this fantastic work that you've done. And thanks for taking the time to explain it all to us.
Thank you. It's always good to catch up.
Thanks.